Welcome, everyone. Today we're going to look at the Course in Miracles and how you can use it in your life. My name is Melody Krafft, and I'd like to introduce my guest. So on my right is Drew Heller, and Drew Heller is both a student and a teacher of the Course in Miracles. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we have Diane Hayworth, who is back, our resident author and integrated life coach. Good. Thank you for coming back. Thank you. And over here in the orange is Rosemary Mark. And Rosemary, you're a designer, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and you're also a longtime student of the course.
Yes, that's right.
Good, great. And Nancy Giffen, who has also studied the Course in Miracles and is also a psychotherapist. So, what I want to start out today with the question is that exactly what is the Course in Miracles? Now, a lot of people who may be watching us may not be familiar with it at all. So Drew, I'm going to actually direct this question to you because you've been really studying this, and I know that you also facilitate a class yourself. So for someone who's really not familiar with this, they're just stepping into it, how would you kind of frame it and give them a sense of what it's all about?
Well, I think I would say that it's a spiritual journey where one can begin to learn about what they are, not who they are, okay, and how their life works in terms of their lifelong journey back to their source. It is a book that really finally brings you to a lot of peace and joy when you finally begin to open yourself up to its information. Okay.
Rosemary, so you've been studying for like 30 years.
Yes.
And we're actually in a Monday night evening Course in Miracles group. And so I've asked you this many times. I'm going to ask it to you again. For someone who really doesn't know anything about it, how would you describe it to a person?
I'd say, first of all, it's a system of thought. It's a way of thinking about ourselves and others and our relationship to one another, and challenging the way we've been raised and the way society has taught us to think. And in that ability to challenge the way we think, to think differently, to choose to think differently. And ultimately, the goal is to be closer to God.
And so can you talk about the split mind, because that kind of comes into it? Well, how
Yeah.
we have this choice of where we want to put our focus?
One way to think about it is growing up as a Catholic child, I was taught that we have an angel on one shoulder and a tempting devil on the other shoulder. And what this sets up is kind of a mental ping pong going back and forth. And in Course in Miracles terms, we would say it's our ego and the Holy Spirit in conversation back and forth. And what we want to do is really to listen to the Holy Spirit, to get direction from the Holy Spirit and learn to train our mind to not be ruled by what the ego is telling us to do.
Yeah, because we often fight our ego when we recognize that we want to make a change in our life. We think, oh, okay, we have to fight the egoic thoughts, and really that gets us nowhere. And it's just really a matter of changing our focus from really listening to the voice of the egoic consciousness and focusing it to what the Course in Miracles term is, the Holy Spirit. And when I say Holy Spirit, I don't mean that within a religious content, but that's just listening to truth, to your soul.
Now let's talk about that religious content.
Okay,
part.
go ahead, Drew.
Oftentimes people are dismayed by the use of religious terminology in the Course, such things as atonement and forgiveness. And the book was written basically to address the Christian religions of the Western world and to help us to rethink the way we have been taught and looking at it a little differently in terms of what Jesus has to say to express yourself in not so much a religious way, but in a spiritual way. The thing that is challenging to me is some of the words used in the Course are very Christian-based words. And you do really have to understand how they're really defined. Okay. For example, the word atonement is as a Catholic, I had learned that a great deal. But in the Course, atonement means that you understand that you're not separate from God. So it has a total different meaning than you would normally think. In the Course, he uses what he titles the forgiveness process, which is the whole foundation of the Course. And in forgiveness, we think about, forgiving someone what we think they did to us. And in the Course, forgiveness has a total different definition. It's an undoing of the way you previously thought and thinking in more of a spiritual realm about forgiveness. It's very deep. And it is, as far as I'm concerned, the basis of the Course, because it takes you from seeing life as you viewed it now to slowly, gently, as he says, help you understand that what you're seeing is different than what is really there.
Yeah, a lot of people think forgiveness is they have to forgive somebody else, a body.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not what forgiveness means in the
Not in the
Course.
no,
Yeah.
it doesn't.
And so you really, you want to forgive yourself for thoughts that you have that are really come from the egoic consciousness.
Right.
Would you say
And
that's correct?
That's correct, and that's a process that takes some time to understand, be able to apply.
Mm-hmm.
But it's beautifully done. It's beautifully done.
And you don't learn this overnight, this course.
No, you don't.
No. No. So, Dan, how do you use the Course in your life, the Course in Miracles?
Well, I'm relatively new to the Course. I've been studying it a couple years. And I think, like a lot of people, I had the book 10 years, picked it up, put it down, picked it up, put it down. It kept coming to me. People were referencing it in other works. And so I started with the workbook. And every day was doing some of the lessons actually in the workbook. And then I've started reading the text. But what the way I use it every day is to help guide my daily practices, whether it's in my business, in my family, whatever I'm doing. The forgiveness has been huge for me. It really created such a sense of freedom in my life that I hadn't had. It was just beautiful. And I've shared it with my family, with my children. It's really been life-changing for me, and I look at it every day.
So it helps you where you place your focus.
It helps me with my life orientation. It's
That's
like sometimes when I feel myself getting a little off course, I'll go back to the Course and remember, oh, wait a minute, this is what this is really about. And it just helps, it's like my internal navigation system, my little spiritual GPS is the way I use it.
Oh, so that's great. So when we, especially when we're in a situation where we become have a conflict with someone, you
Or
can,
fearful or anything
yes,
like that.
Yeah, you can recognize like, oh, this is not what it appears on the surface.
That's exactly what happens.
So how do you do that?
First, I have to become aware that I have allowed myself to get pulled in the direction of fear or overwhelm, which is a big one for me, or some sort of, it's usually a fear issue, really. And once I recognize it, then it's like, oh, then the mask is off, and it's like, oh, this is not really what's happening.
Can you give an example?
Yes, actually.
Good.
There was a situation with my darling husband, and I thought he just wasn't being quite as rational as he could be, and he certainly wasn't listening to my rational way of thought. And I managed to get myself a little upset about it and realized, this is not what's going on here. There really wasn't an issue with that. What I realized was he was reflecting back to me some fear in myself. And once I did that, and I actually used one of the processes that Gary Renard talks about, I think it's in the Song of Prayer, did that, and this issue that was kind of a big issue with my husband seriously just dissolved. It just was gone. And a lot of it was because it was no longer an issue for me. I didn't see it as an issue any longer. It just dissolved.
I think to make it a little simpler to people that don't know anything about it, what you're talking about and what you do, the course helps you understand that process, helps you to think differently, gives you tools to help you look at things differently.
Like a template for me. It was like a
Yes.
template that it was like,
Yes,
oh, okay.
yes. So it's not that all of a sudden I open the book up and I'm a brilliant psychologist and I know how to handle you.
No.
No, it's a process that he gently guides you along as you begin to look at yourself, and then in relation to that, to your reactions to other people, your thoughts about other people, your feelings about other people. And he helps you to understand those in a gentle way so you can bring yourself back to some peace.
What is so beautiful to me is the way the awareness unfolds. And then when you have that awareness, then you understand, oh, here's a forgiveness opportunity. That's like a joke between my son and I. Anything happens, well, there's a forgiveness opportunity for us. And we can look at it from that standpoint and use it as a tool to deal with whatever we're dealing with.
Right.
But the awareness has been huge, and it's made a big difference in the way I live my life.
So Drew, you used the word he, and for people who are not familiar with the course, we need to clarify who he is and maybe giving a little bit of background about the history, how this all came about with Helen.
Okay, let's see. Well, help me out with it a
Well,
little bit. It's
1965 is when Bill Thetford, which was her director at, I think it was the Presbyterian Medical Center in New York. They were both psychologists and on the faculty there. And when they would go to meetings they were doing a research project at Cornell University. And so it was a group of psychologists that got together, and it was really unpleasant. They were competing with each other, they were getting angry. It was not a happy situation.
Bill and Helen.
It was the whole group,
Oh, the whole
and Bill
group
and
was
Helen. And so Bill said to Helen Schumacher, is that the correct way to pronounce their names? Okay. He said to her, there has to be another way. And that created the opening for Helen as a scribe to start receiving information about the Course in Miracles. So now I'm going to turn it over to you to explain it a little bit more.
Helen was Jewish. She was also highly, highly intelligent, high IQ, very versed in the Bible, very versed in languages. So, according to a friend of theirs, Ken, okay, the way he described it was that she began to hear a voice in her head. And for a psychologist, that was devastating. She thought she was psychotic, something was wrong with her. And so finally she was telling Bill about it. And he said, well, why don't you just relax with it and write some stuff down and then bring it in and we'll talk about it. So she decided to do that. And that's when she began to understand it was not her voice and that it was the voice of Jesus. And he said to her, you made a deal with me a long time ago that you would do this for me at this particular point in time. And she argues with him the entire, why me? I don't have to do this. I can't do this. I don't want to do this. I don't like scribing.
Resistance.
And he was, just extremely patient with her. So the first part of the book, chapters 1 through 5, you can kind of get a sense of them trying to come to some peace with each other over it. And then after that, when she decided to be the scribe, things began to flow very beautifully in the information in the book. A lot of it is prose and prayer and poetry, just so beautiful. And Bill would transcribe it. She would listen to it at night and he'd take it in and he would type it up. So that is basically how it got started.
And I understand it took 7 years for that process.
7 years, yes, 7 years. When I see that book, I think, who could sustain that? It was quite something, quite admirable.
And so for people who have trouble with and are resistant to it, Helen was subscribing it, and yet she was resistant to the message all along. She never even shared the information with her husband, what she was doing, and that's 7 years.
Yes, and some of it was due to, it's just a little weird, you know, for a psychologist to be doing something like this. So we don't want to let it get out too much. But anyway, finally she really got into it, and it began to flow beautifully. So yes, 7 years is a long time for this to happen.
Yeah. So Nancy, how do you use it in your life?
Similar to what has been said before, it's just a structure. It gives me a structure on how to view the world. And it is a process of shifting of kind of what we've been taught and what we've learned how to view, the lenses we've learned how to view through. And it's a process of then moving over to another lens. And it's what you were saying, the moving back and forth. And the goal being then to be able to see through this lens taught through A Course in Miracles. And it just, once you start the process and understand how beneficial it is, you just, it is beneficial. So I just kept going and kept going and kept going, and it's helpful. And so it's just a reinforcing system because it makes your life better. It makes my life calmer. It gives me, when I have difficulties, I have a structure and a framework to guide me through whatever that is. And so it takes a lot of the pressure and worry and concern off of me because I'm using my structure and the guidance of the book.
Do you find that it seeps into your private practice with your clients? Do you use it? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's, I always start with where my clients are. And of course, I would never impose my system on someone else's. And I generally do try to get a sense of their religious or spiritual framework just because I view that as a resource and a support for their lives. And so through whatever they tell me about their structure, I have to be careful with that because I want to be respectful of where they are. But I think that there are some concepts, for example, when we talked a little bit earlier about fear, and there's an idea that the Course talks about that's really beautiful, about this idea of wanting to attack back. How we feel attacked, and our natural instinct is to attack back. Well, that's a natural thing to talk about in therapy because that's what we all instinctively do. And my goal as a therapist is to increase everyone's self-awareness. And so starting with that inroad for people and just talking about that concept is hugely beneficial. And then depending on how receptive people are to the certain languaging, there are some people I'm currently working with who are very receptive to language, and we talk openly about the Course in Miracles, and we talk openly about how to apply the lessons of the Course for whatever particular situation they're going through. And I love that. I love that when that can happen.
Well, to give a PS on that, some people have a difficult time with the idea of Jesus and Helen. Some people have a hard time with the words being used because they're very Christian based. But what I was told a long time ago was, look at the content.
Right.
Go beneath the surface and look at the content. Forget about who did it and what did it and how it was done, or the words being used. There are good explanations for that in one of the books about them, but just look at the content. That's what's important.
Yeah, one of my favorite lines in the Course is, love is content and not form of any kind.
There you go.
And I go back to that in a lot of times to explain how I feel about something. And there's so many lines that pop out, especially from the workbook, lessons that will just come up, like I can see peace instead of this, or in my defenselessness, my safety lies. Those kinds of things that just will pop into my mind in any given situation and explain things. You know, I'll go, oh yes, oh right. It kind of takes you back to center a little bit. And it's a little reminder, a little nugget. And it's important to hang on to those little nuggets because, as we said, it's a daunting book. It can be. So to have just little pieces of wisdom. I even told people, I think you could take one page or one lesson. You could study it for a month or a year. Just take a little piece of it. It's like DNA. You just need a little piece of it, and the whole is all there. You know, it's all encompassing.
So do you, I'm sorry, go ahead, Nancy.
Well, what I was going to say is I hope we're going to talk about how people have come to kind of jump into the Course in Miracles, because it is a daunting book, and people do pick it up and they do put it down, and it's hard to jump in. And it's not necessarily something you start reading from page 1, and I think it would be helpful to people who are new to this to learn how maybe we did that or some ideas of how to begin that.
Well, I always encourage people who want to start studying it to get some of the Ken Wapnick books, because he worked with Helen and Bill throughout his whole life. And this man understands it, and he writes it in language that people can understand. He's also a psychologist, so it does have that kind of orientation, but it's much easier to understand. And if you read any one of his books, you have that light bulb moment, oh, I get it. And then you can go back and start exploring the Course book, and it makes more sense. So I have a whole bunch of Ken Wapnick's books, and they're all wonderful.
Well, you know, and to clarify that, Ken has a book that just explains the text. And then he has a book that explains the workbook. And I'll just say this. I had been reading the Course, trying to understand it for years. When I got Ken's book, I was starting all over again, because I really had no idea, or just barely ideas of what he was trying to say. And Ken makes it so clear.
Yeah, and he's a natural teacher. I mean, he taught at the university, and so he would teach the Course in Miracles to his students.
But he was also a part of Helen and Bill's group. He was the younger one. And he was with them a great deal and interviewed Helen many, many times. And he even wrote a book about her, which helped us understand a little bit more of how the Course was put together. But he was one of the few originals in that group.
Don't you think it speaks, it's so interesting what you just said, it speaks to me to the power of the message, because there's plenty of books at my house that I picked up, put down, and gave away. But you even said, you know, I'd been trying to study this, and I think lots of us have had experiences where we looked at it. There is just something about the message that just kept pulling me in, just kept coming up, and it was so beautiful. And what you had said with some of the nuggets in the a workbook, to me that is such a tool that when I'm able to remember some of those nuggets, there is such a freedom from regret, remorse, resentment. It's just beautiful, and that's that kind of power in the text that keeps drawing me back to it, actually.
Well, there's such truth to it, and that's why we keep going back to it.
Yeah.
You know, when you read, it's like, oh, that's what I'm doing. You just know on a very deep level that it's true, so that's what keeps calling you back. So the Course, I want to go on kind of to the next question about talk about the split mind, because that is a real big piece of the split mind, and it's like, well, you were just talking about the little devil on the one side. Yeah. So who wants to talk a little bit more about the split mind, because that's really an important piece.
Well, it took me a while studying with Ken. He diagrams what he calls the split mind. I mean, it's the actual diagram in the book. But he says the Course is there to speak to your mind. Not to your body, not to the world. The Course addresses your mind. He says you are your mind. And he says within your mind there is a decision maker. And that the Course that he speaks to you as a decision maker. And he often spends a great deal of time talking about making a decision of whether to listen to the ego side of your mind or to listen to what I call the higher side of your mind, which is, you can call the Holy Spirit or oneness or whatever you want. When he says the mind is split, he talks about the fact that you long ago chose to remove yourself from who you really were, spirit, and in so doing, you created a lower mind, which he calls an ego. This is getting rather complicated and gets into a lot of details and can be very frightening, but it really isn't, because he softly tells you what it's all about. But when you're able to see that your reactions to your life, to yourself, to others, is in this, what I call the lower mind, and you begin to understand how the higher mind works, you can reflect that back in the lower mind where you really are, because you are there. Don't deny that you're not. You are there, and this is the means by which you will move out of it. Now, that's very complicated and probably beyond really a discussion.
Well, you know, you're talking about it can be frightening, and I think the frightening piece is just because studying this course makes you really look at yourself. And you have a lot of beliefs about yourself that aren't true, because they're based in fear, they're based in the ego. And that's the stuff, the ugly stuff you don't want to look at, you don't want other people to see it. And so you have that resistance. So I think that's the scary piece. And it's also scary if I open myself up to love, then I will be vulnerable. And again, that's all about the ego. You going to say something to that?
I think that part of the scary, or part of the beauty and the truth, is the little lessons like you are not your body. That's wonderfully freeing to understand. And even though, you know, we have heard that, the way that he gently brings you through to the understanding that you really aren't your body is beautiful. And to me, there was a lot of fear around, I'm going to get sick, or this could happen, or I need to take these vitamins. There was a lot of fear around that. And understanding from a course perspective that the real me can never be affected.
Right.
That is just...
Okay, then who is the real me?
The spark of God.
What is the real me? Yes.
That spark of God, that's that eternal essence.
Yeah, because people do, what do you mean I'm not my body? It's like, because, wow, you know, it feels real.
It certainly does feel real, because we feel, but as I've matured, I know that inside I feel the same way I did when I was 21. And that's not what my license says now for many decades. But the essence of me still feels the same, even though this is not. So from that standpoint, it's much easier for me to realize, you know, I'm not this.
Yeah.
I'm not, if there happens to be an issue. You know, I tell my clients, you know, you're not your arthritis, you're not your cancer, you're not your abusive situation or whatever it is, that's not you. Yeah. And the course helped me understand that in a much deeper way.
The real you is eternal.
Right.
You cannot die.
I think it's important to mention, because these concepts are very complicated and complex, and that is the daunting part of opening the book and reading it and just not knowing what to do with any of it. But the workbook is what gently guides a person into the material and helps to disassemble the old thought system. And then as you progress through the workbook, which is 365 lessons, there's one for each day of the year, that you begin to build up this new framework. And that was tremendously helpful, because I don't know if I would have been able at all to understand the concepts just in the text without going through the workbook.
That's what I did.
And there's so many levels to this. I mean, it's kind of like we're talking about all the different levels at once, and we start out just in a basic understanding of, okay, in my ego mind, this is who I think I am. I am this, I am all the definitions that I would claim to be. But my spirit mind doesn't claim any of that. And if I can let these go, then I can be here. But then if this is who I think I am, How do I let that go? That's the tension all the time. This is how I identify myself in the world. How do I let that go? But when you can, and there are moments and moments and moments, and they build on one another, you see that not only is this who I am, this is who we all are. And that's where we really want to be, that we realize the oneness with one another and with humanity. That's, to me, the ultimate goal. And that's what we're striving for. But it's difficult, and they're just all these little...
There's no loss here. There's
Exactly.
There's no
Exactly.
loss here.
Only gain and freedom. Freedom is
Right.
what I keep thinking of.
And people who say, "Oh my gosh, what do you mean? I'm not." There's really no loss here. If you think you are a body, you are a body. Be comfortable in it, and that's okay. And the Course leads you through that process. But here's what really, to me, matters is that when I finally understood who I was, really who I was, and all the things that can happen to you in your life and your relatives and
Right.
friends, even in those moments that can be very hard, there's a sense, a deep sense of peace and joy, because you realize you are always. You are never not always. You are always. And that gives you that no matter what comes in your life and what you face, that gives you that sense of knowing and peace. And you can just take a deep breath, because everything is really all right and really has always been that way. That's what it means to me to have that with me all the time, no matter what's going on around me or what I'm involved in. I can still always go back to that sense of peace and joy. And the Course has led me there, slowly but surely.
I always think of people who are starting and how, it's beautiful when you get down the road.
Oh, it
but
is.
again, how do I get down the road? And from my experience, I did get benefits pretty immediately.
Me too.
That I didn't have to understand things fully. That's a lifelong process of the deepening, the levels involved, like you were saying, Rosemary. And it's just the beginning gives you enough peace of mind or something. I think that would be an individual thing, but to keep going. And that you don't have to understand all of these concepts to be able to find peace and understand there's a new way, and even just being willing to consider a new way is huge.
And he always says, just give me a little willingness, and it will be provided.
And I love what you say. You don't have to know. I don't know how a cell phone works. I still use one,
Good point.
but I don't have to understand.
The complexity.
I don't have to. But I get the benefit from it. And I felt the same way. There was a flow to my life that happened. The energy that I used to spend being nervous, fearful, upset about whatever was happening in my life, when there was more of a peace around it, then suddenly I had all these mental resources that I now had these opportunities for solutions that I didn't have before, because I was too tied up in the fear or the overwhelm or whatever it was. The flow is just beautiful to me, the way that works. No matter where you are in the Course, is what I found.
And when you are in those moments of fear and overwhelm, that's what I was referring to as the structure. I have something to do. I have something that gets me, that reminds me of what to do with this and what this is not, that sort of thing. And that then gets me back into the flow, where it's easier to move past those things that come to us in our day and the events in our life.
I agree.
So for someone who's just kind of thinking about, gee, maybe I should pick up this book and start reading it, Rosemary, what would you recommend how they even should start approaching it?
It's different for everybody. I know there's some people who say you should do the text first and then the workbook. The book is essentially the text, a workbook lesson for every day of the year, and the manual for teachers. I think the workbook is a great place to start because it starts out with basic ideas and builds, and you don't have to do one a day. You can do one a week. You do it however it speaks to you in whatever way it speaks to you. But actually, lots of times too, I just take the book and open it, and wherever it opens, it's the perfect thing for me to read at the time. But in terms of really understanding the totality of it, to me, I think doing the workbook. But also, I can't say enough about being in a group. Because the group, even, we don't have to have one person who's an expert. We're all in different places and we all have different insights, but we support one another in thinking of the world in these terms. And that opens you up to thinking that this is possible. I mean, it's just, it's one of the most important ways, I think, to add to your knowledge of the course.
In our Monday night group, but I can see the difference in people from the time they started, a year later or 2 years later. They're like different people. They just.
I'm going to throw a monkey wrench into that a little bit because I found the group to be very distracting. That for me, spiritual work is very personal, and that what I'm trying to do is make a connection this way. And that could just be the way we're kind of wired, how we, I don't really know, because I do think there's huge benefit to groups, but for me, I like the self-study aspect of it better.
Well, it is a self-study, and I've been in different groups, and there's only been one that really resonated with me. So it may also be just finding the right group for you too.
And
I'm also not a real big group person, so that might be some of it is just that personal style. I guess the reason I'm saying this is so that people, if they don't have a group, if they don't, know where one is or have an area, that they can still start.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's
also
online.
stuff. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's online.
Online. That's one of the ways I started. James Twyman had a lesson a day, and he actually added a little musical aspect to it. And it was only 5 minutes. I mean, a day. It wasn't really very much, but it just was a lovely way to reinforce it for me because geographically I didn't have groups near me.
And there are apps. You can get the lesson of the day sent to you on your phone. Or there's so many ways to go about it. So.
Yeah. What were you going to say, Drew, about that?
The Course says that every spiritual journey is personal. And if you make the first step to be willing, it will be open to you, and what you need will come.
In the perfect time.
Right. And I think we all
when
know
you're ready.
that. And there is, like everyone just said, there's so much available out there to help you understand if this is what you want to do, or if you can do it on your own.
It's always nice to have someone to talk to about it too.
Yes, there is.
That's
But
true.
if you
That is
want to
true.
do it on your own, I'm telling you, information will be there.
But there's also all those books that help, from Kim Wapnick to Marianne
so
Williamson's book's been
many.
out, 20 years now, or
So many
Gary
books.
Renard.
So many
More and
books.
more all the time.
Yeah. So there's some nice options with that as well.
Right, and it helps.
Oh, they help tremendously.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, in our Monday night evening group, we were actually reading Gary Renard's book, and he approaches it through his personality, and so we laugh a lot in it, but we also get a lot of insight. So, you just keep trying until you find what really feels right for you.
I think that's why there's so many
Right.
options.
Because we all learn differently.
Yeah. Yeah, I happen to be fortunate enough to know a lot of people who study the course so that I can do my self-study, but have access to people and can get questions answered, or just that reinforcement of the framework that we're all talking about. That is helpful.
And I want to bring up, because I know, Nancy, you had mentioned this to me, about the issue of fear, that how it can be a call for love. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, when I sent that to you, what I was really thinking about was that idea of attack, because that's a way that I have found kind of lay people, if you will, people who are maybe not familiar with the languaging in the course, can understand this idea of just our natural instinct is to put up our defenses and then attack back. And it's just kind of ingrained in us until it's not. And we've talked some about how the course is we have to build our self-awareness. You know, whose voice are we listening to? Well, that comes from self-awareness. And this has been a nice inroad for me in having conversations with people. The way the Course talks about it, there's only two things. There's love or there's fear. And fear just means anything that's not love, really.
Right.
It doesn't have to mean that I'm frightened. It can just mean that I'm upset or I'm overwhelmed or I'm, you know, I can't think of something else. But and generally when we get into that mode, we want to blame somebody. We want to point the finger at somebody. And then we start, you know, attacking that person. And what do? But they attack us back. And now all we're doing back and forth is getting more and more ammunition out. And now we're launching grenades and nothing gets resolved. Versus if we follow the concept of love and there being the idea of there's only one response to anything. That if you encounter love, you respond with love. And if you encounter fear, another way to view that is to see it as a call for love. And I think of myself, when I'm overwhelmed, when I'm frustrated, when I'm whatever, the last thing I want is to be yelled at or I don't know, just I want someone to comfort me. That's a call for love. So I've come to be able to now recognize other people's upsetness, which is that call for love. And so what's the response? Love. And of course I can recognize my own calls for love. But I can do, if there's not someone there, you know, to kind of do that self idea of, oh yeah, I'm not that, I'm this. And so it's that readjustment constantly that we kind of refer to of getting us back on that track.
Yeah, because when someone is angry and fearful, it's really reflecting that they don't feel safe, that they don't feel loved.
Yeah.
And so that's what they're really asking for, but they don't know how to ask for it. So it just comes out into the form of fear and anger.
Well, here's a real basic story about that.
Good.
There was a mother, and she had 2 children, and they were adolescents. And all 4 of them were at home on a Saturday. And the young adolescent male was not feeling good. So he was, not happy, didn't want to do anything, opposed everything that went on. So the mother said to the father and the daughter, let's just get up and give him a lot of hugs and love. And they did. And she said, our whole Saturday was beautiful. He just responded to it. And I think that's such a good story about something so basic as giving love.
Because what we want, our natural instinct for lots of people is to just say, adjust your attitude and stop moping around or whatever it is.
Right.
Instead of that, which is really what is being asked for.
Yeah. And her daughter said, where'd you get that idea, Mother? That's the greatest thing I've ever seen. So cute.
I think about a time, only because just at that time in my life, this was stark contrast to everything going around me. Simple thing, I was driving through a big parking lot, and you know how you sort of cut through because it's all wide open spaces, and I had a fairly new car. And somebody came along and hit me. And I'm immediately just irate. And I get out of the car, and I look at this woman, and there's a child in a car seat in the back. And I looked at my car was okay. And I just looked at her and said, take care of your child. And to me, it was like a switch went off in my brain. I can think about this in one way, or I can think about this in another way. And it just made such a difference, just this small little event in my life, really, not anything major, but to realize that I had a choice. And to keep coming back to that we all have a choice in any moment.
Yeah, and I think that's a big piece in the Course in Miracles. It constantly reminds us that we're the decision maker, that we always have a choice. Where do you want to put your focus, on fear or on love, or on illusion or reality? Yeah. It's really that simple. It's not always easy, but it's simple.
And it's the self-reinforcement of, it feels better to do that. It feels better to bring the peace. It feels better. And there is that kind of selfish motivation then. I just want to feel better. So I'm going to choose more often this path over here.
But what a beautiful ripple effect. When you feel better, then it just, the way you respond to what did it do for this lady? How did your response, how could it have affected her life?
You know, I don't know, but here's another parking lot example. I was at the Arlington Farmers Market one day, and I'm coming into the lot, and it's over at Courthouse. And they make you pay for parking in the mornings on Saturdays, which is kind of silly, but the farmers market's all there. At any rate, I'm pulling into the parking lot, and a woman is coming out, and she has her window down, and she's waving to me, and she said, "Here, there's 45 minutes left on this parking ticket." It's the paper one you put in your dashboard. And, you know, I wanted to give it to somebody. I said, "Oh, thank you." So I go in, I get my peaches or whatever. I'm only there 5 or 10 minutes, so I'm thinking, well, I'm going to do this again. So I wait until somebody comes in and I give it to them. No big deal, but I'm thinking all day, how did that replicate itself all day long?
How fun.
Not just in the parking lot, but somebody does it something else, and you have no idea. And the Course says that you have no idea about miracles and the way that they are received, and that's really not the point. You know, to focus on how they are, but just the idea that it's not just changing us; it's changing the world around us.
And not just the people that got the parking, but the way I'm sure the peach vendor, you were real happy with the peach vendor, and maybe at home you were really happy that day, and you were real cheerful paying your bills. I mean, there's just such a beautiful ripple effect when you are happy, at peace, more balanced in your life. Then there's just such a beautiful effect on the community around you, no matter what, if it's just you and your pet, there's still. My cat is happier when I'm happy. She is.
Surely she is. She operates off of feelings. So
there you go.
Yeah, that's what the Course does. It just keeps us. We really can use it as a tool, as a roadmap. So we keep our bearings. Yeah. So the next thing I want to talk about a little bit is we haven't talked about too much. Is about how perception makes projection. Drew, what would you like to say about that?
Okay. Trying to keep it a little bit superficial.
Just start wherever you want to, and then we'll talk about it and see where it goes.
The Course will tell you that in the lower mind that you project your thoughts out. And in the higher mind and spirit, you extend love. You extend out. But you cannot extend out when you're in your lower mind, in your ego mind. So what you do is you basically project. So how does that work? Okay, so say I go to the grocery store, and there's this cashier, and she's waiting on me, and she's not happy. And she's shoving things around and talking very abruptly. So projection would be, I think, oh my God, what's wrong with her? Why doesn't she like me? This isn't very much fun. That's projection. What I'm doing is I'm hearing something and I've decided what it means. And when I decided what it means, I didn't like her, then I can project out and say, well, just hurry up and get it done. What's wrong with you today? You see what I'm saying? Now let's say I saw her asking for love. I don't know what's going on with her. Maybe there's something very serious in her family or with her. So let's say this time I hear her and I go, oh my gosh, this woman needs some love. And I decided that that is what I saw. So I project out to her this feeling of love and say, hope things go well for you the rest of the day. See the difference? So projection is simply seeing something, deciding what it is, and then acting on it. That's what projection basically is. Now I can go much deeper, and there's other levels of it.
It doesn't have to have anything to do with the truth either.
Right.
Oh, nothing.
Usually doesn't.
Usually doesn't, yeah.
No, it has to do with what you see and what you decide it is and how you respond to it. Projection is that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we see examples of that every day. I mean, we would just, if you've watched the conventions of like the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, I'm not going to get into politics, but you see that happening So it's interesting. We can look at the same thing and see different things.
And that ties back into the decision maker in
Yes.
your mind. You know, as a decision maker in your mind, this is so instant, so instant. You look at something, you see it, you decide what it is, and you decide what it is. You're the decision maker. I decided I didn't like what I saw. I decided she was just asking for love. That's how fast it works. So you're constantly making decisions about how you see things and what you do with them. But the key.
And you have the choice. You always have the choice.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that 20 years ago. I didn't know I had choices, that I could make decisions instantly about I thought what everybody said to me was about me, and that's the way it was. I didn't know any better. But when I learned I had a decision maker in my mind, and I could sit back and say, well, now, how am I going to respond to this? Then I can do what I want to do. And if I respond in love, it's going to come back to me. If I respond in anger or upset, guess what's coming back? Anger and upset. So choose which way you want to feel. But you can choose.
Yeah. So this is a good explanation why we shouldn't be concerned about what other people think about us, because generally it has nothing to do with us.
Right.
It's their projection.
Or what we think of ourselves. If we think we did something stupid or whatever, I certainly had a lot of negative self-talk in my life in the past, and that's something that's really changed. Understanding the two minds.
Right. And the decision maker.
And the
that
judgment.
You can decide how you really want to see yourself. And of course, this. Okay, here you are as the ego down in all this trouble, and here you are, the most powerful, beautiful spirit in the world, and you can make a decision. Which
You're
one
not
you
the
wanna
action,
be.
it's wonderful.
I want to talk just for just a second about the decision maker, because some people might not understand what that is. Other books references as, the neutral observer, the distant observer. Those are the only two terms I can think of right now. But it's that part of you that it's not that it literally sits back here, but you can sort of view it as that. It's the part that's watching what you do. So if, for example, you're feeling sad, how do you know that? Well, there's this part that's watching you being sad. So it's getting in touch with that part, which is this neutral decision maker. I mean, that's just really the best word for it, but I do know that other teachings call it something else, so people may be familiar with different names for it. And it's that part that just is kind of just there, and it just sits and watches and helps you when you're in that decision point. Am I going to go that way? Am I going to go that way? And I heard one time that the greatest power we have is the power of choice. Because it's that decision that we make constantly.
And of course, that's really the only great power you
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
right now. Yes, you're right. Exactly right. But the other point of that to me is, if I do something to someone, and I'm going, why did I do that? Who's saying, why did I do
Yeah.
that? So that decision maker is with you all the time, seeing what you're doing, making decisions, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes when I got used to that, I used to sit around and go, I am the decision maker here. I'm the decision maker.
There's so much more to this that we can talk about. In fact, there's so much. We're going to do this again next month. So I'm going to ask our audience to tune back in next month, because we're going to continue this conversation. And there was so much more I wanted to ask you all. But for those people there's a lot of community resources that are available for someone who wants to step into this. I do offer a Monday evening Course in Miracles class, and it's a community resource at the Rising Phoenix Holistic Center at 7 p.m., and whoever wants to come is certainly welcome. The address is on my website, which is melodykraftartist.com. I also want to say, if you want to know more about the Rising Phoenix Holistic Center, that's where we hold it. Tune in on Monday mornings at 10 o'clock for the FPA radio station. You'll hear more about it, and I'm actually going to be on it next month talking about spiritual healing. Let's see what I have not said yet. Thank you all. I wanted really to talk about guilt, because that's a big piece that we all deal with. So we'll talk about that next time. Does anyone have one last final comment that they want to say?
I'll say if you're intrigued by what's being talked about, go get the book. Go look it up online. Download the book. Look for that free daily download, and just get curious about it.
Yeah, yeah. It'll take you to a new place, a better place. Yeah, so you can't lose on it. So again, thank you all for coming.
welcome.
We much
Thank you.
appreciate it. And I know some of you are going to be able to come back next month and we'll do this again. So, and thank you, audience, and see you next month. Thank you.